Hey guys, it's Dave. Happy Friday. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you've had a great week. Today I wanted to take a look at the latest interview from Peter Beck. He was actually talking to Ashley Vance, the author of the When the Heavens Went on Sale book that I've been talking about recently. I actually just finished it myself. I found it very interesting. A lot of stories about the early days of RocketLab, Planet Labs, and a lot of these other companies that we were all following very closely, including Astra as well. And really what they were getting into during this interview was a lot about the future of the space industry and where they see it going, Rocket Lab's place in it, and what they're trying to accomplish over the long term. So I just wanted to bring you some of the most important clips, or what I thought was the most important, as well as give you my thoughts on that. The link to the original interview will be down in the description below. Please do check that out and support the original channel. As with all these interviews I provide to you guys, it's definitely very important to support the original creators. Before we get into that though, if you haven't already, I hope you'll consider subscribing with the link down below as well. Any like and comment always helps out with the algorithms. Thank you guys so much in advance. With that out of the way, let's take a look at Peter Beck's latest interview. All right, let's jump right in and hear what Peter and Ashley have to say.
I mean, you could say execution. It's amazing to me to watch people who've done this before still struggle. Like, on the one hand, it's rocket science. We know this is hard. On the other hand, Rocket Lab, you had a group of 20-somethings that really had never built a rocket before. You did not go to college for this. You were designing dishwashers at one point.
Remarkably similar, though.
But, I mean, you guys have clearly figured something out that just got all that right, and it's still sort of a mystery to me.
Yeah, well, I think it's building the right team, setting the right vision, building the right business around it, being kind of very deliberate about how you build your company, as well as building the rocket, and I'm sure there's a little bit of luck thrown in there too. But at the end of the day, I've generally found if you say to somebody, you know, we have a motto at RocketLab, do what you say you're going to do. And everybody gets measured against that. And generally, if you say that I'm going to go and do something and then you actually go and do it, that builds good trust. And if you continue to do that all the way through, then you build a good company.
So perhaps not the most important in terms of news for Rocket Lab, but I found that clip very interesting, and I thought you guys might too if you haven't really looked into the history of the company, which goes much deeper in the book. But fascinating story, really, how they started up in New Zealand with really no aerospace industry there. Peter Beck didn't go to any sort of college or university for this sort of stuff. He just loved it so much and read and learned everything he could about it and dove into all the hands-on stuff. Eventually, as was mentioned there, working on dishwashers and going from that to rockets. And this group of 20-somethings with no real experience has really succeeded, where everyone over in the United States and had all these access to extra resources, people like Astra and all them, have really struggled. So it's really an amazing story. And just also talking about doing what you say you're going to do, I really appreciate that as an investor, because when they give projections, I really need to be able to count on it. Something when I'm looking at other companies I can't always do, especially after this SPAC craze, when all these companies were projecting crazy high numbers and not getting anywhere near hitting them. With Rocket Lab, generally pretty trustworthy on their guidance and doing what they say they're going to set out to do.
In space, the first big businesses so far have been communications, satellites, and imaging satellites.
Yep.
And this is like the entire premise so far of like what this is hanging on to a large degree. You know, I'm just so curious about, do you see that as being enough for the next 10, 15 years? Do you think something else has to come along? And you know, what might those things be?
Yeah. Well, I think about this a lot because, you know, there's always the promise of the industry and all the market studies that predict, you know, depending on which market study you can pick up, between $1 and $2 trillion is like a factor of error of 100% of how large the market will be in 2030. But I think some of the key factors for me that are more comforting than ever are you're seeing like real fundamental use cases from really large companies I mean, obviously, you know, Elon's got Starlink, and that's kind of proving its worth. Amazon have got the Kuiper, which is kind of the equivalent. You've seen now, you know, Apple with their E91 service, voyage into space, and that there's enough kind of real use cases from real companies that it's kind of a little bit obvious now that that is going to proliferate.
But all that stuff is really communications at its core. I mean, do you think? So for people who don't know, I mean, you know, we went from 2,500 satellites like 3 years ago in low Earth orbit to about 10,000 today. We've been on this suddenly exponential curve after it had been like this for 50 years. Huge chunk of that is communication satellites. I just always sort of think, I can see the near term, but like, does that stuff make money? And then what comes next? Otherwise, the air starts to come out of the room pretty quick.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair call. And in the last, I would say, 10 years, you've seen a tremendous amount of venture capital flow into various space business models, and some have been pretty successful, and others, you know, not so successful. But I think with any new frontier, there is a certain amount of throwing the mud at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah.
And you know, we went through that process for a long time, and then, like I say, now you've got like Amazon building a hugely large constellation to service their customers. And yeah, you can kind of loosely characterize it as comms, but I mean, Amazon actually have a purpose. It's not just to sell internet to people. It's like it drives their business model and actually improves their business model. That's why they're doing it.
That particular clip was pretty interesting to me because I've been trying to puzzle out what the next stage of growth for the low Earth orbit satellite industry is. Obviously, as they mentioned before, Starlink, Amazon, even OneWeb, these are all communications, and even you can throw in like radio, television. This is all communications when you get down to it. And I was kind of trying to think to myself, is that the biggest area of the future? Obviously, there's also Earth imaging with the likes of OneWeb, Black Sky, and a lot of others. But what area is RocketLab going to play in, right, when they eventually come out with their own satellites? And it sounds like here Peter Beck is still very confident in the future of communication satellites in low Earth orbit and the wide range of use cases they may have. So perhaps that is somewhere that RocketLab will get into in the future. I was a little worried about competing directly with Starlink at some point, but it seems like such a wide range of communications satellites that hopefully they can find a niche, and communications, at least right now, is the big booming industry. And I think it's been proven now, especially with Starlink and the subscriber numbers continuing to grow, that this will be a very profitable business for the future. So interesting to see Peter Beck's thoughts on that. And, you know, talking about Amazon several times, I've said repeatedly that I think we're going to see a lot more deals between Amazon and RocketLab going forward. And the fact that he talks about it a lot, I think does provide a hint in that direction.
Do you think, I mean, some people beyond communications, they talk about manufacturing. You just did a really interesting thing where you partnered with this company called Varda that's making a bioreactor, a pharmaceutical factory in orbit. So that's manufacturing, this idea that you can make chemicals and molecules in space that are different from Earth. There's talk about, you know, moving data centers up into orbit and reducing pollution on Earth, just having them be solar powered. Do any of these applications jump out to you as the most likely? Or
yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure that launching data centers into orbit is better for the environment than keeping them on the ground. But you know, in Varda's sense, it's just physics, right, and chemistry. There's a fundamental. If you're in a zero-G environment, you know, crystal proteins grow differently, and in the search for kind of new and more exotic things, that's unshackling, you know, that production process from gravity is pretty game-changing. And, you know, at the moment, it's really only been until now that you can do that as a startup at any kind of level of scale. Prior to, you know, even 10 years ago, you just wouldn't do that.
$100 million just to
just to try.
Yeah.
Like, you know, for some tens of millions of dollars, and I know that sounds a lot of money in some senses, but for some tens of millions of dollars, you can have a crack at a really big thing.
Yeah, that's an extremely interesting mission Rocket Lab did with Varda. They recently announced that they successfully began the manufacturing process of those pharmaceutical crystals in low Earth orbit on the platform using Rocket Lab's Photon. So once they're done making those, they will re-enter Earth's atmosphere, and we'll get to see the results. So that could be a potential business line for the future. And Ashley here just really trying to pin Peter down on what other than communications could be like a next big area. I do think the data center one is a little bit more interesting than I guess Peter talked about. If you can have, you know, a satellite getting solar power 24 hours a day instead of 12 hours a day, it can just sit in orbit doing all that compute work and just getting the solar power, not creating any emissions on Earth. Maybe there is something to be said for that. Not something I've looked into too closely, but at least in concept, it sounds like an interesting idea, but it doesn't seem like that's anything Rocket Lab is working on right now.
If we could just pull up a slide for a second where we polled the audience. Before this, I found this fascinating. I'm not trying to hawk my book, but I wrote a book that's kind of the opposite of the results of this poll. I mean, to me, the most the most activity, the most money is not tourism, it's not Mars, it's in low Earth orbit where the number of satellites is increasing exponentially. What do you make of that though? That the public thinks tourism, you know, is where this is heading,
well, I think
as opposed to sort of industry and business.
It's a masterful piece of marketing from Virgin Galactic. That's what that says to me.
Yeah.
But I know, it's more seriously, I think a lot of people kind of like the idea of going to space, and human spaceflight has always been the draw card, right? I mean, it is a totally different thing to watch a rocket going up, with a human on board. There's just orders of magnitude different, and that's the kind of the romance of space in a lot of sense. So it's not totally surprising that everybody wants to have their trip.
So yeah, still on this topic of future use cases of space, and obviously he's pointing out that space tourism, a lot of the general public believed would be the next big thing, although I do think that was a bit of a leading question, the way it was phrased, saying like the future of space travel, and if you put travel in your head, then tourism is kind of obviously where some people might go. But yeah, mega constellations, really the big one right now. Space tourism is just barely a fraction of a fraction just getting off the ground. I don't have a lot of confidence in that area, whether it's, you know, a Blue Origin, a Virgin Galactic. Not really something I'm super keen on investing in right now. But it's interesting to see where the public thinks things are going versus, you know, where things have actually been going, and really hope, you know, we don't see space warfare in terms of like weapons going and being used in space. That would really, I think, be the beginning of the end of, you know, monetizing low Earth orbit for all these satellite constellations.
So historically, you and SpaceX have been quite different. SpaceX makes large rockets. You made a smaller rocket. SpaceX does do humans. You guys have not focused on that. You know, moving forward, you're making this rocket called Neutron that is going to compete quite directly with SpaceX's Falcon 9. At the same time, SpaceX is making a even larger rocket called Starship. You know, dealing with Elon, competing with Elon comes with its challenges. Yeah, I'm just very curious if you see SpaceX moving forward now as your most direct competitor, and how you keep pace with this company that seems to have somewhat of a head start.
Yeah, I mean, look, in some respects, a lot of people want to kind of play that card, but I guess we're on our own mission, our own journey, and at the end of the day, everybody focuses on the rocket like it's the exciting red stick roaring in the sky. The reality is, I'm trying to build a big, like, long-lasting, durable space company. And I think the space companies of the future are going to have their own rocket, they're going to be able to build their own satellite, and they'll have an application or a series of applications or infrastructure in orbit. And I think that's the end game here, is that if you have your own rocket and you can build your own spacecraft, then you can do things in orbit that nobody else can do. So in that sense, you know, SpaceX has kind of focused in on internet from space and are moving quickly to try and prove if that business model is going to be successful or not. But I think, ultimately there's going to be a number of those, and the companies that can go to orbit at will are the ones that are going to win.
I can't wait till we find out more about Rocket Lab's Constellation. Obviously, Neutron's coming along well. They already have the capability of building out satellites, as we're seeing with a lot of their contracts and their own Photon spacecraft as well. So they're really getting to that goal that Peter was talking about. I don't think we're going to see an announcement on what their own satellites are going to do and be until more like 2026, I would imagine, when Neutron is flying and they have the capability to go ahead and put them in orbit, so they don't announce something way far in ahead. But yeah, he does seem to think there's room for more players there, and kind of pushing back that, it's either them or SpaceX, saying that they're on their own journey, and, it doesn't really have to be one or the other that's a success.
Historically, we've only had rocket companies, we've only had satellite companies, You've been a software. You're talking about something much bigger than that. How many players are there like that?
Well, I mean, hopefully there'll be two.
But do you think do you think this is like a two company race, or it's more than that?
Look, I think it'll be more than that, but I don't think it's going to be 10. I think it'll be relatively small, because the reality is that launching a rocket and building a rocket and going to orbit is just an assault on physics, and it's really difficult to do. And it doesn't really matter. You can have better compute, and you can have AI, you can have all the rest of it. At the end of the day, it's 1.1 to 1.2 times safety factor or margin on every single thing in the vehicle. And materials, if you look at a rocket engine, the combustion efficiency of a rocket engine hasn't really changed since 1962. We just increased the pressure, but the actual combustion efficiency hasn't changed. So we kind of maxed out on chemical propulsion and on physics and on materials and a long time ago. So most of the stuff you see is kind of tweaks around the edges, or in kind of Elon's scale is you just build bigger and bigger rockets. So I think it's fundamentally always going to be super, super difficult to do.
So as I was listening to this, I was trying to think of who would be the second person to have their own rocket launching their own constellation into orbit. And I couldn't think of anyone off the top of my head really outside of Rocket Lab, because the two seem very separate. So, of course, Amazon's Kuiper is going to be launched by Blue Origin, and they both have that Jeff Bezos connection. Those are still technically two very separate companies, and Amazon doesn't seem to have any interest into doing their own rocket. Blue Origin, at least right now, doesn't seem to have much interest in building out their own satellite constellations. And then a lot of the other satellite operators we're seeing right now are really not touching launch. They're just staying away. So Rocket Lab seems like the clear second company that is going to be launching their own satellite constellation, which will hopefully give them an advantage in the future. Again, depending on how that Blue Origin connection with Amazon works out, if Amazon maybe even acquires them one day, or that's a very curious relationship to me between those two companies. Let me know down below how you think about them. Do you almost consider them the same entity, or completely separate?
What is your next launch, and when is it, and what will you guys be doing?
You know what? I don't know, and I think that's the definition of success, that I don't know. No, but
you're right to some degree. It used to be this all or nothing.
Yeah, all or nothing thing.
Affair,
so
right?
I'm probably in the next. We're launching, every couple of weeks in general. So
yeah.
Probably in the next couple of weeks there'll be another launch vehicle that's ready to go.
Yeah, kind of cool to see how, him not knowing when the next launch is kind of like a proof of success, because early on when you're getting going with a rocket company, especially, the Fireflies, Astros, Virgin Orbits, all the rest, the CEO, you better believe, knows exactly when that launch is going to be, and you have like a massive part of the future success of the company hanging on that launch. That's no longer the case for Rocket Lab. They have their launch reliability down. The cadence is picking up. We're starting to launch almost every 2 weeks right now. So times are good for Electron launch anyway, and that's just another sign of it. That was the last clip we had from this interview. Let's go ahead and wrap up the discussion. So yeah, I thought this was a particularly interesting and timely interview because I've been trying to puzzle out what Rocket Lab is going to be aiming for with their own constellation, and a lot of the questions in this interview were about the future of the space industry, whether it's still all communications, whether we're looking at some tourism creeping in there, data centers up there, drug manufacturing maybe, then there's, you know, satellite debris, deorbiting old satellites, space tugs, different types of communications. And then obviously we can't forget Earth observation, but it does seem like communications will continue to have the bulk of the business and will be the cash cow for the near future. Always love to hear from Peter and his thoughts on the future of the company. Really, you know, continuing to hint on where they're going long term, but I really just want to get some firm details on our future constellation. Kind of tough to hear about it, but not know any of these details. Let me know if you have any thoughts on Rocket Lab's constellation and when it will be announced, what it will do, in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great weekend. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button down below. It'll help me out a lot. And I will see you in the next video. Goodbye for now.